Marcus's words sliced through Helena like icy daggers as he pulled away from her outstretched hand, his face twisted in disgust and rejection. "I can't accept this bond," he declared before the entire mountain community. "She lacks the spiritual strength required for someone of my lineage." What Marcus didn't know was that, deep in the forest shadows, Golden Eyes had witnessed everything, and the true Alpha had already chosen his mate. The words struck Helena like ice-cold daggers, piercing her heart as Marcus stepped back from her outstretched hand, his face twisted with disgust and rejection that would haunt her dreams for months to come. "I cannot accept this bond," Marcus declared, his voice carrying across the ceremonial circle where the entire mountain community had gathered to witness what should have been the most beautiful moment of Helena's 23rd year. "She lacks the spiritual strength necessary to stand beside someone of my bloodline. The ancestors have made a mistake." Helena felt the world tilt beneath her feet as gasps rippled through the crowd like stones thrown into still water. The ceremonial flowers in her dark hair suddenly felt heavy, their sweet fragrance turning cloying in the mountain air. Her hands trembled as she lowered them to her sides, the silver bracelet her grandmother had given her for this moment catching the firelight with cruel mockery. "Marcus, please," she whispered, but her voice was lost in the murmur of shocked conversations erupting around the sacred circle. The elders exchanged troubled glances, while children were quickly ushered away by their parents, as if Helena's humiliation might somehow be contagious. Elder Thomas stepped forward, his weathered face grave with concern. "Young Marcus, this is highly irregular. The bond ceremony has been sacred to our people for generations. To reject one's destined mate without proper consultation." "I have consulted the spirits," Marcus interrupted, his jaw set with stubborn pride. "They have shown me that my future lies elsewhere. Helena Morrison may come from a respected family, but respect alone cannot bridge the gap between what I need and what she can offer." Helena's mother rushed to her side, wrapping a protective arm around her daughter's shoulders, but Helena barely felt the embrace. The shame burned through her like wildfire, consuming every shred of confidence she had built over the years. She had prepared for this moment since childhood, studying the ancient traditions, learning the ceremonial words, dreaming of the life she would build with her destined partner. "The spirits told you this?" Helena found her voice at last, though it came out smaller than she intended. "Or did Cassandra whisper doubts in your ear during the new moon gathering?" A flush of anger crossed Marcus's features, and Helena knew she had struck close to the truth. Cassandra Welsh, the blacksmith's daughter, had been circling Marcus for months like a hawk eyeing prey, her golden hair and bold laughter drawing his attention away from quieter, more thoughtful pursuits. "My decision is final," Marcus stated, turning his back on Helena in a gesture so final it felt like a physical blow. "I choose freedom over a bond built on tradition rather than true compatibility." The crowd began to disperse, voices rising in heated discussion about this unprecedented break from custom. Helena stood frozen in the center of the circle, watching her carefully planned future crumble like autumn leaves in a harsh wind. The mountain peaks that had always felt protective now seemed to loom over her with judgment, their snow-capped summits gleaming cold and distant in the moonlight. "Come, sweetheart," her mother murmured, guiding Helena away from the ceremonial space. "Let's go home." But home felt like a foreign concept as they walked through the village streets. Windows glowed warm with lamplight, and Helena could see families gathered around their dinner tables, their lives continuing normally while hers lay in ruins. Mrs. Patterson stepped out of her shop as they passed, her expression sympathetic but curious. "Helena, dear, I'm so sorry about tonight. But you know, sometimes these things happen for a reason. Perhaps the spirits have something better planned for you." Helena nodded numbly, unable to form words past the lump in her throat. "Something better?" How could anything be better than the life she had imagined with Marcus? They had grown up together, shared childhood adventures in the forest paths, dreamed together about the cottage they would build overlooking the valley. That night, Helena lay in her narrow bed listening to the mountain winds howl through the pine trees. Sleep eluded her as Marcus's words echoed endlessly in her mind. Lacks the spiritual strength. The ancestors made a mistake. How could someone she had loved since childhood speak such cruel words? Had she truly been so blind to his feelings, or had something changed in him recently? The next morning brought no relief from her humiliation. News of the rejected bond had spread through their small community like spilled honey, sticky and impossible to clean away. When Helena ventured to the village market, conversations stopped mid-sentence as she approached. Sympathetic looks followed her every step, each one feeling like salt rubbed into an open wound. "Helena!" called Sarah Chen, her closest friend since childhood, hurrying across the cobblestone square. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Are you all right?" Helena managed a weak smile for Sarah's benefit, though it felt like her face might crack from the effort. "I'm surviving. Barely." Sarah's dark eyes flashed with anger. "Marcus is a fool. Everyone knows you're 10 times smarter than him and twice as kind. His loss, truly." "Then why does it feel like I'm the one who lost everything?" Helena asked, her voice breaking slightly on the last word. They found a quiet spot beneath the old oak tree at the village's edge, where they had shared secrets and dreams countless times before. Sarah pulled a small bundle from her basket, revealing fresh bread and honey cakes from her family's bakery. "You need to eat," Sarah said firmly. "And then you need to remember who you are. Helena Morrison, keeper of our village's historical records, the woman who can recite every legend and tradition by heart. You're not defined by one man's inability to see your worth." Helena picked at the bread, though her appetite remained absent. "But what if he's right? What if I truly lack whatever spiritual strength he was looking for? The bond ceremony is supposed to reveal truth, not create illusions. The only truth revealed last night was Marcus's character," Sarah replied with uncharacteristic sharpness. "Have you forgotten how you helped Mrs. Holloway when her husband passed? You sat with her for 3 days straight, helping her prepare his spirit for the crossing. If that's not spiritual strength, I don't know what is." A memory stirred in Helena's mind, something her grandmother had once told her about the old ways, before the community's traditions had become so rigid. But the thought slipped away like mist when she tried to grasp it, leaving only a vague sense of something important forgotten. 3 weeks passed in a blur of sympathetic looks and whispered conversations. Helena threw herself into her work at the village library, cataloging ancient texts and maintaining the historical records that had been her family's responsibility for generations. The musty smell of old parchment and leather bindings provided some comfort, a reminder of knowledge that transcended the petty social dramas of daily life. She was deep in translation work on a particularly challenging manuscript when the door chimes announced a visitor. Helena looked up, expecting to see one of the village children seeking help with their studies, but instead found herself staring at a man she had never seen before. He was tall and imposing, with dark hair that seemed to catch the afternoon light streaming through the library windows. His clothes were well made but practical, the kind worn by successful merchants who traveled between settlements. But there was something about his presence that made the air in the small library feel charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice carrying a subtle accent Helena couldn't place. "I was told this is where I might learn about your community's history and traditions." Helena set down her translation work, suddenly conscious of how she must look after days of neglecting her appearance. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and her wool dress, while clean, was hardly her finest. "Yes, I'm Helena Morrison, the village chronicler. Are you passing through or planning to stay in our area for a while?" The stranger's eyes, an unusual golden brown that seemed almost to glow in the lamplight, fixed on her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "My name is Darius Kane. I'm a trader, interested in the customs of mountain communities. I understand your people have maintained traditions that have been lost elsewhere." Something in his tone suggested more than casual curiosity, but Helena found herself drawn to the opportunity for scholarly discussion. It had been months since anyone had shown genuine interest in the historical work that consumed most of her time. "We do pride ourselves on preserving the old ways," she replied, gesturing for him to take a seat at the reading table. "Though I must warn you, some of our records are quite detailed. Are you looking for anything specific?" Darius settled into the chair across from her, his movements graceful in a way that reminded Helena of the great cats that sometimes prowled the mountain forests. "I'm particularly interested in your seasonal festivals and any legends about supernatural guardians. Many mountain communities have stories about protectors who watch over them." Helena felt a flutter of excitement at his words. This was exactly the kind of research she loved, diving deep into the folklore that most villagers took for granted. "Oh, we have extensive records about the seasonal celebrations and the guardian legends." She paused, remembering suddenly that she was speaking to a complete stranger. "Forgive me, but may I ask why a trader would be interested in such specific aspects of our culture?" A shadow of something, regret, caution, crossed Darius's features before he smiled. "I've found that understanding a community's deepest beliefs helps me serve them better. People are more willing to trade with someone who respects their traditions." It was a reasonable explanation, but Helena's intuition, sharpened by recent betrayals, detected layers beneath his words. Still, the prospect of sharing her knowledge with someone who genuinely wanted to learn was too appealing to resist. "Very well," she said, rising to retrieve a leather-bound volume from the archives. "But you should know that some of these stories might seem strange to outsiders. We mountain folk have always lived close to forces that city dwellers prefer to dismiss as superstition." As she opened the ancient book, its pages crackling with age, Darius leaned forward with obvious interest. The afternoon sunlight slanted across the manuscript, illuminating illuminated letters that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Helena began to read aloud, her voice taking on the rhythmic cadence passed down through generations of storytellers. "Long ago, when the world was younger and the barriers between realms were thin, great wolves roamed these mountains. Not mere animals, but beings of power and wisdom who served as guardians for human settlements. They walked between the world of spirits and the world of flesh, protecting those under their care from dangers both seen and unseen." Darius's golden eyes never left her face as she spoke, his attention so complete it was almost unnerving. Helena found herself stumbling slightly over words she had read hundreds of times before, distracted by his intense focus. "The legends speak of bonds between the guardians and certain humans," she continued, her cheeks warming slightly. "Not romantic bonds exactly, but connections that transcended ordinary understanding. The chosen humans served as bridges between the guardian spirits and their communities, helping to maintain the ancient compacts that kept both worlds in harmony." "And these guardians," Darius asked quietly, "what became of them?" Helena turned several pages, showing him illustrations of great wolves with intelligent eyes and ceremonial scenes depicting humans and beasts working together. Most people assume they were driven away as the world became more civilized, more suspicious of things beyond easy explanation. But some of the older residents claim the guardians never truly left. They simply learned to hide among us, waiting for the right time to reveal themselves again. The library fell silent except for the whisper of turning pages and the distant sound of children playing in the village square. Helena found herself studying Darius's profile as he examined the illustrations, noting the strong line of his jaw and the way afternoon shadows played across his features. There was something hauntingly familiar about him, though she was certain they had never met before. "These bonds you mentioned," Darius said at last, his voice carefully neutral, "between guardians and humans. How were they formed?" Helena's heart skipped as she remembered her grandmother's stories, tales dismissed by most as romantic folklore. According to the legends, true bonds couldn't be forced or arranged. They formed naturally between souls that recognized each other across the barriers of species and time. The human partner would feel drawn to the wild places, especially during the full moon, while the guardian would be compelled to reveal themselves to their chosen one. As she spoke these words, Helena felt a strange stirring in her chest, as if something long dormant was beginning to wake. The afternoon light streaming through the library windows seemed to take on a different quality, more golden, more alive. And Darius's eyes, when they met hers across the ancient manuscript, held depths that made her think of forest pools reflecting moonlight. But the moment was broken by the sound of the library door opening, bringing with it the mundane concerns of village life and the reminder that she was Helena Morrison, recently rejected and still struggling to rebuild her sense of worth. Whatever strange connection she thought she felt with this mysterious trader was surely just her imagination, wounded heart, seeking comfort where none truly existed. Yet as Darius thanked her for the afternoon's lesson and promised to return the following day to learn more, Helena found herself looking forward to their next meeting with an anticipation that had nothing to do with scholarly pursuits and everything to do with the way he had listened to her speak, as if her words held secrets worth treasuring. That night, as mountain winds whispered through the pine boughs outside her window, Helena dreamed of golden eyes and ancient promises, unaware that her quiet life was about to transform in ways that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself and the world around her. But something deep in her soul had already begun to stir, recognizing a call that had been waiting 23 years to be answered. The dreams that had begun the night after meeting Darius grew more vivid with each passing day, filling Helena's sleep with images of moonlit forests and the sound of howls that seemed to call directly to her soul. She would wake with her heart racing and the strangest sensation that she'd been running through the woods on 4 legs instead of 2, her human form feeling suddenly foreign and confining. During the day, she found herself eagerly anticipating Darius's visits to the library, which had become as regular as sunrise. He arrived each afternoon precisely when the mountain shadows began to lengthen, always with new questions about the old legends and an attention to detail that went far beyond casual curiosity. Helena had begun to suspect that his interest in their traditions ran much deeper than he claimed, but she couldn't bring herself to press him for answers when his presence had become the brightest part of her days. "Tell me about the moon ceremonies," Darius asked on a particularly crisp autumn afternoon, settling into what had become his usual chair across from Helena's desk. The golden light streaming through the library windows caught the unusual amber flecks in his eyes, making them seem to glow from within. Helena pulled out a slim volume bound in midnight blue leather, its pages filled with her grandmother's careful handwriting. The full moon gatherings were once the most sacred of our observances. According to these records, the entire community would venture into the forest clearing just beyond the old stone circle. They believed the moon's power could strengthen the bonds between the living and the spirit world. As she spoke, Helena noticed Darius's hands tense almost imperceptibly on the table's surface. His fingers were long and elegant, but there was a subtle strength in them that suggested he was accustomed to more physical work than trading typically required. "And these gatherings still take place?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Not in the old way," Helena replied, feeling a familiar pang of loss for traditions that had been simplified over the generations. "Now we have a harvest festival in the village square instead. Much safer, the elders say, and more appropriate for families with young children." Something flickered across Darius's expression, disappointment perhaps, or frustration. "The forest clearing you mentioned, could you show me where it lies?" The request sent an unexpected thrill through Helena, though she couldn't say why. "I suppose I could. I often walk those paths when I need to think clearly. But why would a trader need to know about abandoned ceremonial sites?" Darius was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the illustration of the stone circle in her grandmother's journal. When he finally looked up, Helena saw something raw and vulnerable in his expression that made her breath catch. "Perhaps because I'm not entirely what I seem," he said quietly. "And perhaps because you're far more than Marcus Wellington was capable of recognizing." Before Helena could respond to this cryptic statement, the library door burst open with enough force to rattle the windows. Marcus strode in, his face flushed with anger and something that looked remarkably like jealousy. "Helena, I need to speak with you," he declared, barely sparing Darius a glance. Privately. The familiar sting of humiliation rose in Helena's chest, but it was quickly overwhelmed by a surge of protective anger she didn't entirely understand. How dare Marcus waltz into her sanctuary and make demands after the way he had publicly destroyed her dreams? "I'm currently helping Mr. Kane with historical research," Helena replied coolly, not rising from her seat. "If you have business with me, you can speak freely or wait until we're finished." Marcus's jaw tightened, and for the first time, Helena noticed how his eyes seemed small and pale compared to Darius's warm, golden gaze. "This is about your reputation, Helena. People are talking about the time you've been spending alone with this stranger. It's not proper for an unmarried woman, especially given your recent circumstances." The condescension in his tone made Helena's temper flare like dry kindling catching fire. She stood slowly, her hands pressed flat against the desk to keep them from trembling with rage. "My reputation," she said, her voice deadly quiet, "became your concern the moment you rejected me in front of the entire community. Since you made it clear that I lack the spiritual strength worthy of your bloodline, I fail to see why my daily activities should matter to you now." Darius had gone very still in his chair, and Helena could sense tension radiating from him like heat from a forge. When Marcus took a step closer to her desk, Darius rose smoothly to his feet, his movement fluid and somehow predatory despite its apparent casualness. "The lady has made her position clear," Darius said, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to fill the small library. "Perhaps you should respect her wishes and leave." Marcus whirled to face him, and Helena saw genuine fear flicker across her former intended's features before pride reasserted itself. "This doesn't concern you, outsider. Helena and I have history together. We understand each other in ways you never could." "Understanding," Darius replied softly, "would have prevented you from humiliating her in front of people who have known and respected her since childhood. A man who truly understood Helena Morrison would never have been foolish enough to let her go." The words sent warmth flooding through Helena's chest, a feeling of being seen and valued that she hadn't experienced since her grandmother's death 2 years earlier. But Marcus's face had gone an ugly shade of red, and she recognized the stubborn fury that had always emerged when his decisions were questioned. "You know nothing about our ways or our people," Marcus snarled. "Helena deserves someone who can provide stability and honor, not mysterious strangers who fill her head with romantic nonsense about old legends." "What I deserve," Helena interjected, her voice ringing with newfound strength, "is to make my own choices without interference from men who have already made theirs abundantly clear. Marcus, I want you to leave. Now." For a moment, Marcus looked as though he might argue further, but something in Helena's expression, or perhaps the way Darius had shifted subtly closer to her side, made him reconsider. He straightened his shoulders and attempted to reclaim some dignity. "Fine, but don't come crying to me when you realize what a mistake you're making. Some of us actually care about your well-being, even if you're too stubborn to see it." The door slammed behind him with enough force to send several books tumbling from their shelves. In the sudden silence that followed, Helena became acutely aware of Darius's presence beside her. The scent of pine and mountain air that seemed to cling to his clothes. The way his nearness made her skin feel electric and alive. "Are you all right?" he asked gently, his hand hovering near her shoulder without quite touching. Helena let out a shaky laugh, surprise mixing with relief and something dangerously close to attraction. "I think that's the first time I've ever stood up to Marcus Wellington. It felt liberating." "It looked magnificent," Darius said, and the warmth in his voice made Helena's cheeks flush pink. "You have far more strength than you give yourself credit for." Their eyes met and held, and Helena felt something shift between them, a recognition that went deeper than words. The afternoon light streaming through the library windows seemed to intensify, casting everything in golden relief, and for one breathless moment, Helena thought Darius might lean closer, might bridge the careful distance they had maintained during weeks of careful conversation. Instead, he stepped back, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture that seemed uncharacteristically uncertain. "I should go. You've had enough disruption for one day." "Wait," Helena said, the word escaping before she could stop it. "You mentioned the forest clearing earlier. I could show it to you tomorrow if you're still interested. The moon will be nearly full, and the path is beautiful in the evening light." Darius went very still, his golden eyes searching her face as if looking for something specific. "Are you certain? Walking in the forest at night can be dangerous for someone alone." "I won't be alone," Helena replied, surprised by her own boldness. "I'll be with you." The next evening found Helena waiting at the village edge just as the sun began to set behind the mountain peaks. She had changed from her usual work dress into something more suitable for forest walking: dark wool skirt, sturdy boots, and a warm cloak that had belonged to her grandmother. The familiar weight of it around her shoulders felt like an embrace, a reminder of the strong women who had come before her. Darius appeared just as the first stars began to emerge, and Helena's breath caught at the sight of him. Gone were the fine merchant's clothes, replaced by dark leather and wool that seemed to blend with the gathering shadows. He moved with a fluid grace that reminded her even more strongly of the great cats that prowled these mountains, all coiled power and barely contained energy. "Ready?" he asked, offering her his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. The forest path wound steadily upward through stands of ancient pine and oak, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the moonlight into dancing patterns on the forest floor. Helena had walked this route countless times, but never with such acute awareness of her surroundings. Every sound seemed amplified: the soft whisper of wind through leaves, the distant call of night birds, the quiet crunch of their footsteps on fallen needles. "Tell me about your family," Darius said as they climbed. "Your grandmother's journals suggest the Morrison line has been keeping records for generations." Helena smiled, grateful for a safe topic of conversation. 6 generations, actually. We're the memory keepers of the community, trusted with preserving the stories that might otherwise be lost. My grandmother used to say we were guardians of truth, responsible for ensuring the old wisdom survived even when people stopped believing in it. "A sacred trust," Darius observed, and something in his tone suggested deeper understanding than casual politeness. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm worthy of it," Helena admitted, the words slipping out before she could censor them. "If Marcus was right about my lacking strength, maybe I'm not the right person to carry on the family tradition." Darius stopped walking so abruptly that Helena nearly stumbled. His hands caught her shoulders, steadying her, and she found herself looking up into eyes that seemed to glow with their own inner light. "Never," he said, his voice fierce with conviction. "Let the blindness of one foolish man make you doubt your own worth. You have gifts Marcus Wellington could never comprehend, strength he lacks the wisdom to recognize." The intensity of his words sent shivers through Helena that had nothing to do with the cool mountain air. Standing there in the moonlit forest with his hands on her shoulders, she felt something wild and powerful stirring in her chest, a calling she had never experienced but somehow recognized. "How can you be so certain?" she whispered. "You've only known me for a few weeks." Darius's grip on her shoulders tightened slightly, and Helena could have sworn she saw something shift in his features, a flicker of something that wasn't entirely human. But when she blinked, he looked normal again, though his eyes retained that otherworldly intensity. "Because I see you," he said simply. "Not the version of yourself you think others want, but who you truly are beneath all the doubt and conditioning. You're meant for something far greater than a conventional marriage to someone who could never appreciate your gifts." They had reached the ceremonial clearing, a perfect circle of grass surrounded by standing stones older than the village itself. The full moon hung directly overhead, bathing everything in silver light that seemed to pulse with ancient power. Helena stepped into the center of the circle, her arms extended as she turned slowly, feeling the energy of generations of ceremonies seep into her bones. "This is where the old bonds were forged," she said dreamily, her grandmother's stories flowing through her memory like water. "Where human and spirit touched souls and promised to protect each other across all the barriers of time and flesh." She turned to find Darius watching her with such hunger and longing that her breath caught in her throat. He had moved to the edge of the stone circle but hadn't entered, as though some invisible barrier held him back. "Helena," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "there are things about me you don't know, things that might frighten you if you learned the truth." "Then tell me," she replied, surprised by her own courage. "I'm tired of secrets and half-truths. If there's something you're hiding, I want to know what it is." For a long moment, Darius stood motionless at the circle's edge, conflict playing across his features like storm clouds racing across the moon. Then, with visible effort, he stepped forward into the sacred space. The moment his feet touched the consecrated ground, the air around them seemed to shimmer and change. Helena gasped as she watched Darius's form blur and shift, his human outline wavering like heat mirages in summer. But instead of fear, she felt only wonder and a strange sense of recognition, as if some part of her had been waiting her entire life for this revelation. When the shimmering stopped, a magnificent wolf stood where Darius had been, its coat dark as midnight and its eyes the same golden amber she had come to know so well. He was enormous, easily twice the size of any natural wolf, with an aura of power and intelligence that marked him as something far beyond ordinary animals. Helena should have run. Every rational part of her mind screamed that she was in mortal danger, alone in the forest with a predator that could kill her without effort. Instead, she found herself taking a step closer, her hand extended in invitation. The great wolf watched her approach, every muscle tense with uncertainty. When her fingers touched the soft fur of his muzzle, Helena felt a jolt of connection so profound it nearly brought her to her knees. Images flashed through her mind, endless forests under starlit skies, the freedom of racing through moonlit clearings, the lonely responsibility of protecting territories and people who didn't even know he existed. "You're one of the Guardians," she whispered, her voice filled with awe rather than fear, "the ones from the old stories. You've been searching for something, haven't you?" "Someone!" The wolf, Darius, lowered his massive head until it rested against her chest, and Helena could feel the rapid beating of his heart, the vulnerability beneath all that power. Her arms came up instinctively to embrace him, her fingers tangling in his thick fur as understanding dawned like sunrise after the darkest night. She was what he had been searching for. She was the missing piece that would allow him to bridge the gap between his dual worlds, the human partner who could stand beside him without fear or judgment. All the legends her grandmother had shared, all the stories of bonds that transcended ordinary understanding, they weren't just folklore, they were prophecy. As if sensing her realization, Darius began to shift back to human form, the transformation fluid and natural, despite its impossibility. Helena found herself standing in the circle of his arms, her hands pressed against his chest, where she could feel his heart gradually slowing to normal rhythm. "Are you afraid?" he asked quietly, his golden eyes searching her face for any sign of rejection. Helena considered the question seriously, taking inventory of her emotions. Surprise? Yes. Wonder? Absolutely. But fear? The absence of it was almost as shocking as the transformation itself. "I should be," she admitted. "But mostly I feel complete. Like I've been missing something my whole life without knowing what it was." Darius's arms tightened around her, and Helena saw relief flood his features. "The bond between us isn't something I sought deliberately. It simply exists, has existed since the moment I first caught your scent in the village. But I needed to be certain you could accept all of me, not just the human facade I wear for others." "All of you," Helena repeated, testing the concept. "Does that mean there are others like you, other guardians?" "A few. We're a dying breed, scattered and hidden. Most humans no longer believe in the old compacts, the mutual protection that once bound our peoples together. I had nearly given up hope of finding my destined mate, someone who could bridge both worlds and stand beside me as an equal partner." The weight of his words settled over Helena like a mantle of responsibility and purpose. This was what Marcus had sensed but couldn't name. Her destiny lay not in conventional marriage and village life, but in something far more extraordinary and demanding. "What would it mean," she asked, "if I chose this path, chose you? What would my life become?" Darius cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the curve of her cheekbones with infinite tenderness. "It would mean leaving behind the safe, predictable existence you've always known. It would mean joining me in protecting territories that span multiple mountain ranges, dealing with supernatural threats that most humans never dream exist. It would mean accepting a bond deeper than marriage, one that connects our very souls." The magnitude of the choice before her was overwhelming, but as Helena looked into Darius's golden eyes, she felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This was her calling, the purpose she had been unconsciously searching for through years of cataloging other people's adventures and heroic deeds. But even as her heart sang with recognition and desire, a practical part of her mind raised questions that couldn't be ignored. My family, my community, how could I explain suddenly disappearing with a stranger? They would never understand. A shadow crossed Darius's features. That's where things become complicated. There are others who know what I am, who have been watching and waiting for me to reveal myself. Not all of them wish us well. As if summoned by his words, the sound of breaking branches echoed from the forest beyond the clearing. Multiple figures emerged from the tree line, and Helena felt Darius go rigid with tension as he recognized the intruders. At the head of the group stood Marcus, but his expression held none of his usual arrogance, only grim determination and something that looked disturbingly like triumph. "Step away from him, Helena," Marcus called across the clearing. "We know what he is, and we're here to protect you from making a terrible mistake." Helena's blood turned to ice as she realized the full implications of the scene before her. Somehow Marcus had learned Darius's secret, and he had brought others. She could see at least 6 figures in the shadows, several carrying what looked suspiciously like weapons designed for hunting large game. "This doesn't have to end badly," Marcus continued, his voice taking on the reasonable tone Helena remembered from their childhood arguments. "Just come back to the village with us, and we'll deal with this creature appropriately. You've been under its influence, but that's not your fault." Darius's arm tightened protectively around Helena's waist, and she could feel the controlled power in his muscles, the predator calculating odds and strategies. But she also sensed his reluctance to unleash violence in front of her, his desire to protect her from witnessing the darker aspects of his nature. "I'm not under anyone's influence," Helena called back, surprised by the strength in her own voice. I'm exactly where I choose to be. Helena, please. Another voice joined the conversation, and Helena's heart sank as she recognized her mother stepping out from behind Marcus. You don't understand what you're dealing with. These creatures, they can make humans believe anything, feel anything. Come home with us, and we'll help you recover from whatever spell it's cast. The betrayal cut deeper than Marcus's original rejection. Her own mother, the woman who had raised her to question assumptions and think for herself, had allied with the very people who sought to destroy the most profound connection Helena had ever experienced. But as Helena looked around the clearing at the faces of people she had known her entire life, she saw something that chilled her more than mountain winds. They weren't here to rescue her. They were here to eliminate what they saw as a threat, and her cooperation was merely a convenience, not a requirement. The night that had begun with revelation and wonder was about to become something far more dangerous. And Helena realized that her choice between worlds might be made for her in ways she had never imagined. Standing in the sacred circle with Darius's arm around her and hostile forces closing in, she understood that her old life was ending whether she willed it or not. The only question now was whether she and Darius would survive long enough to begin their new one together. The tension in the sacred clearing stretched taut as a bowstring ready to snap, the ancient stones bearing silent witness to a confrontation that would reshape everything Helena had ever known about her world. Darius's muscles coiled beneath her touch, and she could sense him calculating distances, escape routes, the fastest way to get her to safety before the violence she could feel, building in the air, finally erupted. You have 10 seconds to release her, Marcus called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. In the moonlight, Helena could see he held something that gleamed silver, a blade designed specifically for supernatural threats, she realized with growing horror. Helena! Her mother pleaded from the edge of the clearing, tears glittering on her cheeks. Please don't make us do this the hard way. That thing has poisoned your mind, made you believe you love it. Come home, and we'll help you heal from whatever damage it's done. The casual dismissal of her feelings, the assumption that she was incapable of making her own choices, ignited something fierce and protective in Helena's chest. She stepped forward, placing herself more firmly between Darius and the hostile group, her chin raised in defiance that reminded everyone present exactly which bloodline had produced 6 generations of fearless record keepers. The only poison in my life, Helena declared, her voice ringing across the clearing with newfound authority, was believing that my worth depended on other people's approval. Darius hasn't made me believe anything. He's helped me remember who I really am. Marcus's face twisted with frustrated rage. Who you really are is Helena Morrison, daughter of merchants, keeper of village records. Not some fantasy creature's mate, destined for a life of hiding in the wilderness like an animal. And who are you to decide what I'm destined for? Helena shot back. The same man who rejected me publicly for lacking spiritual strength. The same Marcus Wellington who spent our entire childhood dismissing my interests as childish obsessions with dusty old books. Behind Marcus, several of the other villagers shifted uncomfortably. Helena recognized them now. Thomas Fletcher the butcher, Sarah's father, Robert Chen, even Mrs. Patterson from the general store. People who had known her since birth, who had watched her grow up among them, now standing ready to use violence against someone they claimed to be protecting. This isn't about old grievances, Thomas Fletcher spoke up, his voice gruff with uncomfortable duty. We've all heard the stories from other settlements, Helena. People disappearing, livestock found torn apart, children going missing near the full moon. These creatures might seem noble and romantic in the old tales, but the reality is blood and death. Darius finally spoke, his voice carrying across the clearing with calm dignity, despite the circumstances. I have never harmed an innocent in my life. The livestock deaths you speak of come from rogues, wolves who have lost their way and their honor. They are as much my enemies as yours. Convenient words, Marcus sneered, but we have no reason to trust the creature that's been stalking our community, deceiving us with a human face, while it planned whatever dark purpose brought it here. Helena felt Darius tense beside her, and suddenly she understood something that chilled her blood. They hadn't just discovered his nature, they had been hunting him, setting a trap that used her as bait. The timing of this confrontation, the way they had known exactly where to find them, the weapons they carried, prepared for supernatural combat. "You've been watching us," she said, the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. "You've been following Darius, waiting for him to reveal himself so you could—" Her voice trailed off as the full implications hit her. "So we could eliminate the threat before it could spread," Marcus confirmed with cold satisfaction. "Did you really think we would let a monster walk among us unchallenged? Your father's merchant contacts brought us information about similar situations in other towns. We know how these things end." The betrayal cut deeper than Helena had imagined possible. Not just her mother and Marcus, but her entire community had been planning this violence while she had been discovering the most beautiful connection of her life. They had used her feelings, her growing bond with Darius, as a weapon against him. "You're wrong," she whispered, then louder, with growing strength. "You're all wrong. Darius came here because he was called, because the old bonds still matter, even when we've forgotten how to honor them. He's not a threat to our community. He's its guardian, the way his kind have always been guardians for those wise enough to accept their protection." "Pretty words," Robert Chen said sadly, "but we can't risk our children's safety on legends and romantic notions. Step away from it, Helena. Let us finish this quickly." The casual way he spoke of murder, of destroying someone Helena had come to love, ignited something primal and fierce in her chest. Energy she had never felt before surged through her veins like liquid fire, and the moonlight streaming down into the sacred circle seemed to respond, growing brighter and more focused. "No," Helena said, the word carrying power that made several of the villagers step back involuntarily. "I won't let you hurt him. Not when you're acting out of fear and ignorance instead of wisdom." Around them, the standing stones began to hum with subtle energy, as if awakening after centuries of slumber. The air itself felt different, charged with possibilities that made the hair on Helena's arms stand up. Darius looked at her with wonder and growing understanding, his golden eyes reflecting not just moonlight, but something that seemed to come from within her. "Helena," he breathed, "your bloodline. I should have realized sooner. You're not just descended from record keepers. Your family were the bridge builders, the humans who could channel the old magic when it was needed most." The revelation hit Helena like lightning, illuminating connections that had been hiding in plain sight her entire life. Her grandmother's stories hadn't just been folklore. They had been family history, passed down through generations of women who possessed gifts their descendants had forgotten how to use. Marcus raised his silver blade higher, desperation creeping into his voice. "Whatever trick you're playing, it won't work. We came prepared for supernatural deceptions." The silver in these weapons was blessed by priests from 3 different settlements, but even as he spoke, Helena could see uncertainty in his eyes. The energy building in the sacred circle was unlike anything the villagers had expected, older and more powerful than simple wolf magic. The stones themselves seemed to be awakening, responding to a bloodline call that had been dormant for generations. "Put down the weapons," Helena said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with the standing stones themselves. "Leave this place in peace, and no harm will come to any of you. But if you try to hurt Darius, you'll be fighting not just him, but the ancient compacts that bind Guardian and community together." For a moment it seemed as though her words might carry the day. Several of the villagers looked ready to retreat, their faces pale with growing awareness that they had stumbled into forces beyond their understanding. The sacred circle pulsed with energy that spoke of oaths older than their settlement, promises made between their ancestors and protectors they had forgotten how to recognize. But Marcus, driven by wounded pride and jealousy that had curdled into hatred, refused to back down. "Enough of this mystical nonsense," he snarled, raising his blade. "I'll save you from this monster's influence myself, Helena, even if you can't thank me for it now." He lunged forward into the sacred circle, the blessed silver gleaming with deadly intent. But the moment his feet crossed the consecrated boundary, everything changed. The ancient stones erupted with light that turned midnight into blazing day, and the energy Helena had been unconsciously gathering focused into a barrier that sent Marcus flying backward with enough force to leave him gasping on the forest floor. The other villagers cried out in alarm, their weapons suddenly feeling heavy and foreign in their hands as the sacred space asserted its inviolable nature. But the display of power had consequences Helena hadn't anticipated. The magical energy that had protected them now hung in the air like a beacon, calling to others who understood what it meant. From the deeper forest came sounds that made even Darius go rigid with alarm, howls that carried challenge and territorial anger, the approach of wolves who saw the power flare as either invitation or threat. "Rogues," Darius said grimly, his form already beginning to blur as he prepared to shift. The magic drew their attention. "They'll be here in minutes, and they won't distinguish between innocent villagers and hunters." Helena felt ice form in her veins as she realized what was happening. The very power that had protected them from immediate violence had created a far worse danger. The villagers, already terrified and confused by the magical display, would be sitting prey for wolves who had abandoned the ancient codes that governed honorable guardians. "How many?" she asked, surprised by her own calm. "At least 4, maybe more. They hunt in packs, and they've been growing bolder lately without strong leadership to keep them in check." Darius's golden eyes met hers with desperate urgency. "Helena, I need you to get everyone back to the village. I can hold them off, but not if I'm trying to protect civilians at the same time." "No," Helena said firmly, the word coming out with more authority than she had ever possessed before. "We don't run from this. We face it together. Helena, please. These aren't honorable wolves like me. They're killers who take pleasure in terrorizing humans. You don't understand what they're capable of." But Helena was remembering her grandmother's stories with new clarity, understanding now that they hadn't been just tales, but instruction manuals for powers she had inherited, but never learned to use. The energy still thrumming through her veins felt familiar now, like coming home to abilities that had been waiting her entire life to be claimed. "Then teach me," she said simply. "Show me how to stand beside you as an equal partner, not someone who needs protection." The howls were getting closer, and Helena could see the panic building in the faces of the villagers who had come to hunt Darius, but now found themselves potential victims of something far worse. Her mother was helping Marcus to his feet, both of them looking stunned by the magical backlash that had thrown him clear of the sacred circle. "There's no time for lessons," Darius said desperately. "Please, just get them to safety while you what? Fight alone against impossible odds." Helena placed her hands on his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart, the fear that had nothing to do with his own safety and everything to do with hers. "I won't lose you the moment I finally found you. We do this together, or we don't do it at all." Something shifted in Darius's expression, a recognition of the strength she was offering and the futility of arguing with someone who had finally discovered her true nature. "If we do this," he said quietly, "there's no going back. Using that kind of power will change you permanently. You'll never be able to pretend to be just another village girl again." Helena looked around the clearing at the faces of people she had known her entire life. People who had been willing to kill the man she loved based on fear and prejudice. Then she looked at Darius, whose golden eyes held promises of adventure, purpose, and a love deeper than anything she had ever imagined possible. "Good," she said simply. "I was never meant to be just another village girl anyway." The first of the rogue wolves burst into the clearing just as Helena made her choice, its red eyes gleaming with bloodlust and its massive form radiating the kind of savage hunger that had given supernatural creatures their fearsome reputation. Behind it came three others, their coordinated movement speaking of pack intelligence turned to predatory purpose. But as they entered the sacred space, they found something they hadn't expected, not just a lone guardian and helpless humans, but a woman who carried the blood of ancient bridge builders, someone who could channel the old magic that had once kept the balance between worlds. Helena felt the power flow through her like a river finding its course, connecting her to energies that had slumbered in the stones for generations. Light blazed from her hands as she raised them, not the harsh glare of destruction, but the warm golden radiance of protection and binding. The sacred circle responded to her call, its ancient purpose rekindling as if it had been waiting centuries for someone with the right bloodline to activate its full potential. The rogue wolves found their charge faltering as they hit barriers of pure force, their snarls of rage turning to confusion as the clearing filled with energy that spoke of oaths and compacts they had broken when they abandoned their guardian nature. But they were still dangerous, still driven by hunger and the pack mentality that made them formidable opponents, even for someone of Darius's strength. "Behind me," Darius commanded, his transformation into wolf form flowing like water, leaving a magnificent creature whose size and power dwarfed even the rogues. But Helena didn't retreat. Instead, she stepped forward to stand beside him, her hands still blazing with the light that held the sacred circle's boundaries strong. "No," she said, her voice carrying new harmonics that seemed to resonate with the very stones around them. "Beside you, always beside you." Together they faced the rogue pack, guardian and bridge builder united as their ancestors had intended, their combined strength creating something greater than either could achieve alone. The battle that followed would become legend among those who witnessed it, a reminder that some bonds transcend species and time, and that love combined with purpose can overcome even the darkest forces. When dawn finally broke over the mountain peaks, painting the sacred clearing in shades of gold and rose, Helena and Darius stood victorious, but forever changed. The rogue threat had been eliminated. The villagers had witnessed the truth about guardians both honorable and corrupt, and ancient powers had awakened that would reshape the relationship between human and supernatural communities for generations to come. Marcus and the other would-be hunters had long since retreated, their weapons useless against forces they finally understood were beyond their comprehension. Only Helena's mother remained, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes beginning to show acceptance of the daughter she had never truly known. "You're leaving with him," her mother said, not a question but a statement of inevitable fact. Helena nodded, feeling the rightness of it settle into her bones like coming home. "This is who I was always meant to be, Mother. The records I kept, the stories I preserved, they were preparing me for this moment, this choice. Will I ever see you again?" When the mountain communities need bridge builders to help them understand their guardians, when the old compacts need to be renewed and honored, Helena promised. "I'm not disappearing from the world. I'm finally stepping into my true place in it." As she spoke, Darius moved to stand beside her, his human form restored, but his golden eyes still holding echoes of wolf wisdom. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the certainty of souls that had recognized their perfect match. "The bonds between our peoples can be healed," Darius said, his voice carrying the authority of someone born to lead. "But it will take time, patience, and mediators who understand both worlds. Helena has shown tonight that such people still exist." The sun climbed higher, burning away the last shadows of night and the old fears that had driven good people to acts they would later regret. In the sacred clearing where ancient stones had witnessed the renewal of oaths thought lost forever, Helena Morrison took her first steps into a larger world, hand in hand with the guardian who had waited lifetimes to find her. Behind them, the village would slowly learn to accept what they had witnessed, to remember traditions their fear had made them forget. Ahead lay territories vast and wild, communities in need of protection and guidance, and a love strong enough to bridge any gap between human and supernatural worlds. Helena had been rejected for lacking spiritual strength, but in choosing her own path, she had discovered power beyond Marcus Wellington's limited imagination. She had been meant for something far greater than conventional marriage and village life. She had been destined to help heal the ancient wounds between species, to serve as living proof that some bonds transcend all barriers. As they walked together toward the horizon, where their new life waited, Helena felt complete for the first time in her 23 years. The pain of rejection had led her to this moment of perfect recognition, where love and purpose merged into something that would reshape not just her own destiny, but the fate of all who dwelt in the shadow of the ancient mountains. The girl who had once catalogued other people's adventures had become the heroine of her own epic tale, and the greatest story was just beginning.